Right, so this is chapter 40 is about the making of industrial society. So industrialization is the transformation of agrarian and handcraft industries into reorganized mechanized systems of production. It is driven by inanimate energy or fossil fuels. Involved the new divisions of labor and use of production lines, with key drivers being the key resource being fossil fuels and something else. Fossil fuels and factories, excuse me. Haha. So, you had the agricultural revolution in the 1600s, which led to high agricultural productivity, increasing the population. This in turn led to increased labor specialization. But they also ran out of wood. So they need to think of something else to drive their economies forward. You get this shift from wood and charcoal to coal as the primary fuel. You also get the advent of water transport and major commercial centers. Great Britain was the forefront of this industrialization. Great Britain could do this because of its geographical look. It had the Americas, with the plantation economies being both producers of raw materials, raw goods, and consumers of manufactured goods. America also served as a refuge for the surplus European population. So, a little review of why, according to AP, why Europe was the first to industrialize. We had to consider Europe's location on the Atlantic Ocean, the geographical distribution of coal, iron, and timber that made it ideal, industrialization ideal, demographic changes, urbanization, improved agricultural productivity, legal protection of private property, and abundance of rivers and canals, and access to foreign resources, as well as the accumulation of capital. Yeah, this is basically just the same thing. So the first mechanized industries were invented by King, Crompton, and Cartwright. The spinning jenny and the flying shuttle, which accelerated weaving, and the mule increasing spinning production. You also had the water-powered loom that was replaced by a steam-powered loom, so hand weaving was over. The industrialization of the textile industry produced a huge increase in the availability of cheap cotton cloth and provided thousands of jobs. Also, you had textiles being protected by tariffs, becoming the leading business in Great Britain. Now, FYI, these trade barriers or tariffs, they would also have a negative effect on developing countries like India, which were basically priced out of the British market, and thus many Indian weavers went out of business. You also got a steam engine invented by James Watt in 1765, which burned coal to power boilers where steam was generated. It can be located anywhere, not just on rivers. You also had higher quality iron and steel for lower prices. This was used for bridges, buildings, and ships. The Bessemer process produced better and cheaper steel, which largely replaced iron. You also had the locomotive for transportation, like steam engine, which was basically a steam engine on wheels, steam ships, steam engine of boats. Both of these led to the price of transportation decreasing. That's networks of rail and ship traffic tied regions and their products closer to ports and commercial centers. This facilitated delivery of manufactured products to consumers, further enhancing industrialization. The factory system replaced the putting out system. The complicated machines involved needed large spaces and specialized workers. Capital intensity was required near constant and central utilization. You had a large labor supply from a rural population surplus and the Enclosure Acts. Some factory owners became fabulously wealthy. Oh, note to self: slavery was not a good fit because, just to be put, unpaid slaves aren't going to do much, aren't going to work very aggressively in a factory because they had no incentive. So there was pressure to produce more in a shorter period of time. This led to harsh discipline and closer supervision. This included long hours and poor working conditions. Rural workers had difficulty adjusting to these rigid timetables. You also got Luddites, English handcraft workers who tried to halt the industrialization of textile industry through sabotage. Still, the consumers benefited from cheaper manufactured goods. Enterprising entrepreneurs found ways to obtain the secret information from Great Britain, despite Britain's best attempts to hide it. By the mid-19th century, the U.S., Belgium, France, and Germany were industrializing, with New England becoming a textile center thanks to Samuel Slater. Young women from rural areas provided labor, but then they were later replaced by immigrants. Other industries included shoes, tools, and handguns. By 1900, the U.S. was an industrialized powerhouse, with transportation being vital to this process. So this is basically, a map, in Europe, industrial Europe around 1850. As we can see, England was one of the most urbanized areas of Europe at this time, with lots of railroads, with a dense network of railroads. Here, the rest of Europe, not so much. You had these lovely major coal deposits, in these areas to provide the fuel for coal, to provide the fuel for industrial machines. So industrial capitalism involved mass production of standardized articles. For example, Eli Whitney with interchangeable parts. Investors thus were able to buy you had investors being able to buy very expensive machinery in the industrial age. Corporations would finance new industries. By the late 19th century, corporations controlled most businesses. You also had a financial innovation, the limited liability corporation with liquidity. Investment banks and brokerage firms would support these corporations. Monopolies attempted to eliminate all competitors. For example, you have vertical organization of John D. Rockefeller, horizontal integration of I.G. Farben. Some governments outlawed monopolies while others did little control of them. This basically looked at the advent of crony capitalism, i.e. capitalism. So, the benefits of industrialization: cheap manufactured goods with an increased standard of living and population growth. Labor needs trigger regional and global migrations, with new social classes developing, especially the middle and working classes. You also had family and work habits changing. Reformers sought to alleviate the social and economic problems that accompanied industrialization. So, industry produced from goods for consumers of all classes. Price of food staples went down as a result of efficient machinery and steam-powered transportation. You had decorated houses, the advent of consumerism, better nutrition, disease control, and better sanitation. For example, generous vaccine for smallpox. Population, as a result of these nice living standards increasing, the population rose sharply. Then came a demographic transition, shifting patterns of fertility and mortality. As more babies survive, it becomes more expensive to raise them in cities. So there are fewer babies per woman. So this is a graph of population growth. As we can see, Europe's population just takes off during this time period. Of America, the Americas also increasing, but still pretty small compared to Europe. So rural workers left their farms for the cities in order to find jobs in factories. Cities increased in size, with London being the largest of 6 million. However, you have some serious environmental concerns with terrible air and water pollution. Mary Poppins and Blake's dark satanic mills. Disease with, chimney sweeps getting cancer because of just the horrendous chemicals you find as you sweep a chimney. Inadequate housing, and crime and prostitution. But by the late 19th century, governments were tending to the problems of the early industrial society. You had transcontinental migration. For example, in the 19th century, the migration pattern spread from Western Europe to Northern Europe, followed by Southern Europeans. You also had the potato famine in Ireland driving people out. Pogroms against Jews in Western Europe, Western Russia also driving them out. Excuse me. And political upheaval in Germany with revolutions in 1848. U.S. cities such as New York, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh provided the U.S. with a constant labor supply that was necessary to move into the front ranks of industrialized nations. Therefore, you could say that American industrialization was made possible due to immigrants. You basically get the U.S. population going from 6 million to 76 million in 1 century. New classes of wealthy business people challenged the privileges of the nobility and military. For example, you had a middle class comprising of small business owners, factory managers, skilled workers, and professionals. Or these guys comprise 20% of the population. These were the bourgeoisie. Below them, you had the working class, who are factory and mine workers, aka the proletariat. They were basically wage slaves with nothing to sell but their labor. So these are like the major like gender like stratification basically between that industrialization caused. Basically what you had was men being like, they you had basically, men, going into industry, working the factory jobs, and often spending a lot of their leisure time on self-improvement, or either self-improvement, athletic events, drinking, or gambling. Whereas women, they were paid a lot less, and often they were encouraged to stick to motherhood. Although you had some going into the factory world. So children were hired at factories without parents or relatives on, hey, of course, child labor is crap, long hours, low pay, with abuses leading to regulations and restrictions of child labor. Eventually, they were removed from the workplace and instead attended school in order to make them better factory workers later in life. Yay! England would establish mandatory school attendance laws in 1881. Now, all this industrialization is causing a lot of provokes a lot of critics. For example, socialists being the most vocal and influential critics of capitalism, along with romantics. They viewed economic inequality as the primary problem in capitalism. For example, the utopian socialists Charles Fourier and Robert Owen. They opposed competition of market systems and attempted to create small model communities. For example, New Lanark and New Harmony, Indiana. But most of these would fail. Now, the most influential socialists would be Marx and Engels. They would write two critiques, Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital. They believe that the two major classes, bourgeois and proletariat, were a perpetual class struggle. The capitalists controlled the means of production, while the proletariat were wage workers who sell labor. So he advocated for the worker, as this quote suggests, for the workers to unite together, as they have nothing to lose but the shackles of capitalism. They viewed religion as an opiate of the masses, nothing more than just to distract people from the all important revolution. They viewed property as theft. They also thought revolution was the only way to change the abuses of capitalism and create a just, equal society. They advocated for an overthrow of capitalists in favor of a dictatorship of the proletariat, which will naturally lead to a withering of the state. Socialism had a major impact on 19th century reformers. It reduced property requirements for male suffrage and addressed issues of medical insurance, unemployment, compensation, and retirement benefits. It also helped remove inequalities in representation between rural areas and the growing cities, basically rotten boroughs where one member of parliament would represent an area of the country that has almost no one in there. Trade unions formed for collective bargaining, with conducting strikes to address workers' concerns. They would eventually gradually improve the lives of workers. So, Russia and Japan industrialized slower than the West. In these cases, it was driven by the government, not private entrepreneurship. Russia constructs a large railway network, protects its infant industry, and invites in foreign capital and opens engineering schools. The Japanese government hires thousands of foreign experts. They set these zaibatsus, or corporations that take over businesses once the government establishes them. Japan also opened universities specializing in science and technology. This was all in the name of defense and modernization. Modernize or we get killed. In terms of global ramifications of industrialization, you had a global division of labor between core and periphery. You had rural society, and the periphery, you had rural societies that produced raw materials, aka banana republics, Latin America. Urban societies would then produce manufactured goods, i.e. Germany, Britain, France, United States, Japan, etc. You also got Latin American regions of Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, South and Southeast Asia being export dependent on industrialized countries, many of whom were their colonial overlords. India with Britain is the most egregious example. Latin America had just been politically decolonized, but it quickly became economic colonies. United Fruit Company, all of the Chiquita Bananas, all those awful, fruit companies the United States had that just owned half of Central America. They had a little local control of capital with only a few elites benefiting, while for everyone else, it just sucked. You also had low wages and small domestic markets in these peripheral economies. Thank you very much, and that is all.